Well, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Right. So I don't know exactly why, but apparently Beaver's not letting them keep up.
So there's no downside to it.
That's what it sounds like.
But there's a lot of upside. We're hoping the VDOT processes on it start at 1900.
setting out there.
It's 5:30, right? It's go time. It's go time. Why is my security camera system on?
On. Let's call the meeting to order now. Chairman Dando is not here today, so we have to have a chair pro tem. So if anybody would like to volunteer, or if somebody would like to make a motion to,
I motion that Joe Paul be made the chairman pro term for tonight's meeting.
do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, let's take a vote here. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. Any opposed?
Since we all said aye, there can't be any opposed, so
okay.
we're good.
On the record.
All right.
All right. Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody here to the Roy City RDA Board meeting, June 28th, 2022, 5:30 p.m. in the Roy City Council chambers. I'd like to officially excuse Chairperson Dandoy, as he is out of town. I'd like to recognize Chairperson Wilson, Chairperson Skadden, and Chairperson Sophie Paul. Welcome those in the audience that are here. We are live on the city's YouTube channel. Consent items. Doesn't appear that there are any consent items, so none there. We'll move forward. Action items. First thing we have is a public hearing to consider the adoption of the amended project area plan and budget for the 1900 Southeast Community Reinvestment Area. Any comments before I entertain a motion to go into a public hearing? What's appropriate, Andy? If you want to go ahead and make your presentation, then we'll open up for public.
Is that mic on? Because I can hardly. Can you pull it forward?
Better? Is
There-
that better?
there you go,
Okay.
there you go.
It just needs to be real close, I guess. Brittany, would you be so kind when you get it to bring up the map of the project area that I sent you? It's probably the Exhibit 2-3, I think. There were two of them. So while she's bringing that up, maybe let me introduce what we're doing and why we're doing this. In 2019, we created the Southeast, 1900 Southeast project area. At that time, the creation of this project area was just from the common scent on 5600 on the east side of 1900 going to Riverdale Road. And it did not include the Harmons development, but included all that other property. This year, the legislature adopted what is known as House Bill 151. And basically what House Bill 151 does is it indicates that unless a city has put in an agreement in place and the creation of a redevelopment project area, adoption of that would constitute an agreement under that law, they do not have the right to provide any kind of incentive to any kind of development that might be retail related. As we've discussed, that corner on 5600 going south along the, or north, along the Sinclair, no, south, along the Sinclair, that area there, we've identified that as a potential corner for maybe a different development. We certainly don't know what's going to happen with UDOT, with the 5600 widening yet, but as we've identified that, we felt like that and some of the property across the way could end up being maybe vital to us. And perhaps there could be a development that might come along that might need some type of an incentive. And if they do, we want to be able to work with whether it be property owners, whether it be another developer, whatever. And so we approached the board back in, I think it was in May, end of April, 1st of May, and asked if you would consider holding a public hearing to amend that project area. And what we're proposing tonight is on this map, we're proposing that we add to the 1900 Southeast project area the property that basically goes along 5600 or along 1900 on the east side to where the Aaron Jewelers is at. The project area map shows a much longer area that, but as we've looked and we've kind of discussed, we really don't think we need that as the entire area. So we're proposing that the amended property that be added to this project area only be the property from 5619 to Aaron Jewelers. That's about 5.25 acres. Also, we're recommending that the property across where Wells Fargo and Wendy's be added to the project area. We believe that gives us enough property that for the different uses that we have had some interest in, we've had an interest for maybe a potential hotel, we've had an interest on some office, we've had some interest on maybe a couple of other retailers. This would be adequate to do that. So this is what the public hearing is about. It's adding that property. We're not changing the budget, we're not changing the plan, we're only changing the map and the legal description of the project area. That's all we're doing. Excuse me. Under the notice, we've sent notices to those property owners that were listed on the county recorder as property owners where their tax notices are sell of this public hearing tonight. I've had an opportunity to talk with 2 on the phone. And then 1 by an email correspondence asking us what we're doing. And in both cases, I've received a response that they were supportive of what we're doing. Matt, I believe you had a conversation with the gentleman also, so maybe for the public record, you could add that.
Mr. Nelson, he is here present.
What this does not do, first of all, and most importantly, we have no power of eminent domain. So there's no power to condemn anybody's property. Second of all, we do not have a project. We've just putting this in to protect ourselves so that if we do have a project and somebody needs some assistance through our tax increment financing, then we'll be able to help provide that assistance. Even under this bill, if we were to go buy a piece of property, if it were for any kind of retail use, we can't do that. So again, it's a protection mode that we're doing. But we have no developers, we have nobody proposed, we have to work with the property owners. The property owners get to set their price, the property owners get to decide if they want to be involved in it. If a property owner were to come to us and say, we got a project, would you help? We could consider that. So all we're doing tonight is adding 5.25 acres of property to the existing project area, and we have to do that by amendment. So with that introduction, Mr. Chair, I think we're ready to open it up for public hearing.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Mr. Sant. I would entertain a motion to go into public hearing for the consideration on the adoption of the amended project area plan and budget for 1900 Southeast Community Reinvestment Project Area.
Motion to go into public hearing. Do I have to?
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, we are now in public hearing. If anybody has any comments to make on this, please step to the mic, state your name and your address. All right, seeing no comments, I will entertain a motion to go out of public hearing.
Motion to go out of public hearing.
Have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, we're now out of public hearing. So is this now consideration of RDA Resolution 22-6, a resolution adopting the amended plan for the 1900 Southeast Community Reinvestment Project Area?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, as you know, we need to adopt the plan by resolution of the RDA. And this resolution does that, adopts that area, is now added to the project area plan, and that was the only amendment that's made to that. And while I'm up here, I'll just explain the second resolution, which is to adopt the budget. And as I mentioned, we left the budget the same. We did not add any amendment to it. It's the same budget that we initially adopted in 2019 because we had anticipated the potential use for this in that budget. So we did not need to amend that budget. We will have to come back to the city council with an ordinance, but that will be done maybe at the July 5th meeting. But these two items are what we need to constitute the fact that the project area plan has been adopted.
All right. I have a point of order. As the acting or pro tem, I still have a vote, correct? Okay, just wanted to make sure. All right, I would consider a motion for Resolution 22-6, a resolution adopting the amended plan for the 1900 Southeast Community Reinvestment Project area.
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye. Is a roll call?
Roll call.
Yeah, I think this requires a roll call vote.
All right, Brittany, will you please do a roll call vote for us?
Board Member Sophie Paul,
Aye.
Board Member Scadden,
Aye.
Board Member Joe Paul,
Aye.
and Board Member Wilson.
Aye.
All right, resolution passed. Now I will entertain a motion for the consideration of RDA Resolution 22-7, a resolution adopting the amended budget for the 1900 Southeast Community Reinvestment Project area.
So moved.
All right, do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Brittany, roll call vote.
Board Member Joe Paul,
Aye.
Board Member Scadden,
Aye.
Board Member Sophie Paul,
Aye.
and Board Member Wilson.
Aye.
All right, resolution pass. Based on that, do we have any other comments or business?
I do, actually. I was wondering if Mr. Sant would be willing to review with us how the funding would work for the Economic Development Director position that has been proposed, and how that works currently in with the budget, like this budget, another budget, how it works in the future, what the benefits, what the limitations are. Would you be willing to do that?
Is there any problem with that, Andy?
No, it's not something we're taking a vote on.
It's just a discussion item.
Okay, all right.
Just information. So this is what I can tell you. We have two existing project areas which we take increment from. Both of those will be expiring in 2027, I believe is the date. It's either the end of 2026 or it's 2027, but it's within the next 3 years. The RDA budget that you adopted last week includes the increment, and the expenditures for that are within that tax increment. So most of the increment we get is going to expire within 3 years. I don't know what the funding mechanisms were for that position, but if it's RDA related, you'll lose that funding within 3 years. In the project areas that we have created, we've created a DNRG, we've created a 1900 Southeast, and we've created a 1900 Southwest. In those budgets, we put in a collection of 3% administrative fee. That would flow to the RDA. Those budgets, when we trigger the increment, and assuming that the taxing entities concur with our budget, say you can have that 3% administration fee, for example, we would collect about $35,000 each year for RDA administration out of all three of those. They're about $15,000, $12,500 each. Now again, if the increment goes up over and above our budget, then we would collect more administration fee. But our budget allows for a 3% administration fee for whatever period of time we're able to collect that increment. Our budgets show on most of those a 20-year period of time. So that would be the fee that would be collected, is 3% of whatever the increment amount that we're allowed to keep. Does that answer your question?
Kind of.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe I can ask you and maybe Matt together here. So for example, with this current position that's has been proposed, we have, my understanding, possibly about $120,000 that would be coming out of the RDA budget possibly. And so what I think I hear you saying is that we would probably have $120,000 from that RDA budget for at least 3 years.
That is correct. That money, which I believe we get mostly from one project area, is about 265,000, if I remember right.
Project area number 2.
Two, the
I
Iomega number 2, we get
and
that.
then we get about 35 from over here.
Yeah, and this one, the 35,000 that we're talking about, which is I think the Albertsons, the old Albertsons area, if I remember right, that actually sunsets in 2 years. So that sunsets faster than the Iomega. So in 2 years, we lose the $35,000 in increment, but in 3 years, we lose the $265,000 in increment. Now, in all fair for disclosure, we have the right to go in and ask for an extension of those project areas. But my experience has been the county's willing to do that, but they want you to move it up to the current base year. So in essence, what would happen is we'd lose most of that increment, but we could gain anything from anything new that would be built within that Iomega number 2 area. But with the amendment that we made for the DNRG, whatever development property would be in there for expansion is no longer in that project area. So extensions of project areas have not been very successful in my experience, unless you're willing to move your base year of app to what it is today, which means you lose all of your increment. So that's kind of where we're at with that. But the increment will sunset in 2026 or 2027.
So the funding that would go towards that director position, would that money be able to go towards anything else? For example, we've talked about having first right of refusal from UDOT for some land. Does that mean that's a competition, or does it mean it would be separated?
No, the RDA does have a fund balance. There is a fund balance that the RDA has. And what we've talked about using that fund balance for in previous conversations is not for ongoing expenses, but to look at maybe purchase some of that land and then selling that land. Now, if we purchase that land and sold that land, well, that money comes back into the RDA, and the RDA, it's no longer a fund balance. The RDA can appropriate that however they want to. And if they wanted to use that for future administration, if they wanted to use that for whatever projects, at that point in time, it doesn't have any restrictions. Could you use that fund balance for ongoing administration after 2026? You certainly can, because we amended the redevelopment law, I think back in 2018, if I remember right, that we allow RDAs to have a fund balance. So the fund balance is appropriated by the RDA board. I mean, that's part of the thing that would be done. But we've kind of indicated that we wanted to use our fund balance to help purchase some of that property that might become available from UDOT, and then either give that or use that as an incentive or sell that. So any revenue that came back to the RDA would not be fund balance. It'd be revenue of the RDA that could be used after the RDA sunset. But
What is our current fund balance?
It was like
1.2, 1.5, somewhere around
It
there.
depends on where we end this year.
Yeah, it
We're in
depends
that
on how
period
much
area.
increment we use and how much of that fund balance we have.
And that's fund balance. Is that overall, that's the full amount that's in there?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is correct. And that has been accumulated because over the years we've collected the increment, but we haven't had the same amount of expenditures. So once the RDA sunsets, your only source of increment will be your fund balance. That or revenue will only be your fund balance at that point in time.
Can you use administrative budget for general fund in regards to if we had extra administrative, could that go towards purchase of land, or is that set aside only for that?
The RDA law says that when you receive the tax increment, you budget that tax increment how you see needed as an RDA. So you can use that tax increment for administration, you can use that to buy land, you can use that to do leases, you can use that. There's a number of things. The only thing the law says you can't use your money for, you can't build a police station, can't build a city hall, and you can't build a fire station. Those are the only three things they say you cannot use your money for. But you have the right when that increment comes in to budget the way you see you need to budget that. And that's kind of up to you as a board of how you want to use the increment as it comes in. So either or.
It can go either way. And
It
so,
could go either way.
for example, for that $1.2 million, then, we use $120,000 this year. But we might make more next year in our increment because we still have 3 years, right?
Right. So what we're doing right now is we're not using any of that 1.2 million for any administrative costs whatsoever.
Okay.
When Matt prepared the budget, this position, whatever portion is being done by RDA, is being collected from that tax increment that will sunset in 3 years. So right now, our administrative fee within the RDA budget's being paid by the increment. We'd only touch that fund balance in the event that, for whatever reason, the increment didn't come in as we projected. Then we may have to pull fund balance out to cover our administrative budget. But right now, we're paying for the RDA and all the costs associated with the increment we're collecting.
I see. So the money would come out, the money for that position would come out for the next 3 years from the administrative, but then once it sunsets, that will no longer be the case, and then it would have to go out of the fund balance.
It would either have to come out of the fund balance or it would have to be some other source of funding. You will have some administrative collection, but that's only $35,000, as I said, and that only happens when we trigger the increment out of the other project areas. And we don't trigger that until we start having projects. So it's kind of a catch-22, if
What
you
is
will.
the actual split between city budget and RDA budget?
But right now, let's see, there's $128,000 coming out of the, and this is just estimates because obviously the position's not hired. So right now it's estimated that 128,710 comes out of the RDA and the remaining comes out of the general fund.
So if the position comes in at a lower value,
Then
then
it would
that would be adjusted.
Yeah, correct.
And so I'm thinking is if there's 260,000 coming into it, you multiply that by 3 and then divide that by 120, that's 6.5 years you could fund that position just out of the out of the $265,000 that's coming in right now. Basically, you're going to split that money halfway. So instead of getting 3 years, you could use that money over 6.5 years.
Yeah, again, as you do your future RDA budgets, you can always say, we're only going to use out of the RDA this amount. We're not going to do other expenditures. So right now, that budget has money in there for, it has in there for some consultings. It has some for this. It has some money for travel. There's a number of things that are in that budget that we present to you. But again, the RDA board controls that budget.
And
The city
so-
council does not control that budget. The RDA controls that budget.
And so then, like Joe was mentioning, once that money's in the administrative area, it doesn't automatically transfer over from 1 year over into general fund. It stays in that same pool.
It stays in the RDA until such time as the RDA decides that it wants to transfer it. If the RDA said, we want to take our fund balance and give it to the city, and because we're going to contract with the city to do economic development, whatever, that can be done. If you recall, I think Joe was the only one that was on the council when we did this. We adopted a resolution back in, I think I got really involved to the point that I was actually doing a lot, was in 2016 or 2017. We passed a resolution that basically the city council said the redevelopment agency is the economic development department of Royce City. And so the RDA was running the economic development. The reason we did that is that's how we could justify using some of the tax increment and everything for things that RDA would be outside of an RDA project area. Because we have a lot of economic development that doesn't just happen in an RDA project, it happens throughout the city. So by doing that and having that agreement with the city, it's an interlocal agreement, we're able to do that way. So at the end of the day, when the RDA's project area is sunset and we're getting ready to dissolve those, if there's any fund balance, remember the RDA exists until you as a council say we're dissolving our RDA. We can dissolve project areas, but that doesn't mean the RDA is dissolved. So if you as an RDA exist and you have a fund balance, you can decide how you want to use that fund balance. So if you made a decision that you wanted to transfer $125,000 of that over, that's your decision. But until you dissolve the RDA, that's RDA money and it's controlled by the RDA.
And so it can go for administrative or for
Whatever you as an RDA
purchasing
decide
land.
you want to use that fund balance for. But you have 3 years of about $267,000 of RDA money that can be used for administration or whatever. And as Chairman Paul indicated, if you decide you want to take that and condense that RDA budget and make that go a little longer, you could do it because it'll become fund balance. So if you get to 267, you only spend 120, well, you got fund balance that can roll into that going forward.
So that'd be my other question for Matt is, each year we adopt a city budget, we can adjust that. If that position now is taking on more responsibility as assistant city manager and less as economic development, we could adjust which agency funds it, whether it's the city or the RDA.
Yeah, any budget is actually very fluid throughout the year, and we can change it throughout the year if we wanted to change it, or we can change it next year whenever we would like.
So if
whenever
we
the
see that
council would like.
position over a year, 2 years, becomes less active in that, but you're utilizing that position more for assistant city manager, then, you know, who knows what
Yeah.
next year looks like, taxes. If taxes are better or ongoing, we
Or
can adjust it.
Even if we didn't, even if the position didn't change that we have it, we just wanted to change the funding, we can also do that as well. That doesn't necessarily have to have the justification of economic development. You could pay that out of the general fund in the city.
And that's a department head position that's also an at-will position. It's not a contractual position.
It's a contract.
It's a contractual position, but it's not,
It's
it's an at-will.
correct. It's not a
We
merited
can
position.
terminate it at any time if need be.
In order to make it really simple, probably what you would do is every year you would transfer whatever you're funding that position to the city so that the city is the one that's making the payroll, not the RDA. Because you don't want to take part out of this fund and part out of that fund. It'd get too complicated. So what you would do is when you make the decision to fund that position, you would actually, my recommendation would be you'd make a motion within the budget, because you got that approved, you just make a motion that you transfer over to the city, and we need to do that in an RDA meeting, X amount of dollars, so that the city can actually fund that as an employee.
So to clarify shifting, we can shift and have a higher percentage or all of it come from the general fund, but we can't have all of it come from the RDA.
If you
it's
wanted
not-
to, you could.
yeah,
We can make the decision any way we want as a council and a board, because council can decide how much the city's gonna fund of it. The board can decide how much the RDA is gonna fund out of it.
When it's not directly correlated to anything with economic development, I'd feel very reluctant.
That's
to do
my
anything.
concern.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what I'm,
I-
So
and
like
my
a police
concern.
officer or something like that,
Yeah.
I'd say, no, that doesn't get funded out of the
No,
redevelopment agency.
I think again with that is the simple fact is you have a resolution that basically says the RDA is the one that runs your economic development. So, and you don't want the RDA to have a payroll or anything like that. So the simple thing would be is whatever the RDA's contribution would be, that's transferred over to the general fund. It's an employee paid like any other employee through that. And then you can adjust that up and down every year as you look at that position.
So a final clarification, we have 265,000 a year for the next 3 years, and we can choose and use that for 6 years' worth of a director, or we could take and shift some of that in to purchase land. If we choose to do that, it can be shifted, and either way is very acceptable
Yeah,
then.
right now you've adopted a budget that has uses of that money. You have the right, just like you with the city, to amend your budget. You amend that budget by having a public hearing. So if you decided as a RDA board that you needed to amend your budget, and you need to take some of that money and move it from whatever accounts it into another account, you can do that. You just can't exceed your amount of your budget. So if you budget $330,000, can't exceed $330,000 unless you do as part of that budget amendment, we want to transfer some money over into from our fund balance into our budget to make up any deficit. But right now, you as an RDA board control how that money is allocated and what it's allocated to. The redevelopment law gives you a lot of leeway on what you spend it for. It just says administration. It doesn't say what it is. The only thing the law says that you have to separate, when you send in your budget, when the RDA sends its budget into the state, for whatever reason, it requires that whatever money's being paid for legal fees has to be separated out. So you say, our administrative budget was $200,000, but the legal fees were $60,000 of the 200. That's the only thing that they've said has to be separated out. I laugh because I don't know what happened with that. The only thing I can think of is there might have been some agency that may have paid a lot of money for a legal whatever, and they said they want that separated. But that's the only thing we have to separate. Other than that, you just submit the budget, and it says administration. It's what it is. It doesn't break, you're not required to break out that.
Okay, and then if we're looking at buying land, you know, $1.2 million probably doesn't get a lot right now. So every little bit may matter or it may not matter. What would the next step be? We discussed this briefly, but if we were going to buy land and we didn't have enough in the RDA, do you do bonding for an RDA, or how would we get that extra money, you know, if we're tied or not or whatever?
The RDA is, as a separate independent entity, has the right to borrow money, has the right to bond, has the right to
Lend money?
lend money, has the right for a donation to be made to it. Normally, in that case, what would happen is if we were going to buy a piece of ground and we didn't have money, our first probably would be come to the city and say, listen, we like you, would you lend us $1 million? And tell you what we'll do is that's a loan to the RDA, we'll set terms and everything else, and this is how we pay you back. And most RDAs will start there first. If it's a great big project, then the RDA can go out and bond. But the problem with an RDA bond, it's very, 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 very expensive because the security could be taken away just like that by the legislature. So it's a tough bond. And in a city bond, you might have to have a 1.5 times or maybe 1 times coverage, maybe 1.1. With an RDA, they're probably going to look at 2 or 3 times coverage. So if you don't have adequate increment to make a debt service payment, they're probably you're not going to do a bond.
Not a realistic option.
Yeah, sometimes when you get a big project like that, what I've done before is you have the RDA or you have the city issue the bond, and then the RDA pays the debt service through the increment. So there's ways of doing that, but in most cases, depending on what the amount is, if a city's sitting on a pretty good fund balance, you can always go to the city and say, will you lend the RDA X amount of dollars? We do an agreement, we make it legal and everything else. And then we pay that back either through the administrative money that we collect, the tax increment we collect, or through future tax increment that came off the project.
Okay, and then we have to just be pretty sure we have the ability to pay that back because of the projected tax increment funding.
Yeah, if you
So
don't,
that's where the-
you're basically going to end up forgiving a loan to the RDA.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for taking the time to review that.
You're welcome.
Any other comments? I failed to recognize and excuse board member Ann Jackson. She is not available to be with us tonight, so I apologize for not previously recognizing and excusing her. So, if there are no further comments, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned at 6:03 p.m. on June 28th.